All right, diving in again, folks. This time it's Psalm 23. I bet a lot of you are familiar with it, at least a little bit. But I think with these sources we've got, we're going to uncover some stuff you haven't thought about before.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Like we have this Christian Business Connection radio show, a whole lesson on it, and then this deep theological analysis. Pretty intense. It's be interesting. One thing that really caught my eye was how they look at it from both sides. The sheep's point of view
Yeah.
and the shepherd's.
Oh, for sure. For sure. That's a good point.
Never thought about it that way before, honestly.
It's important, yeah, to really get it. Starting with, well, the sheep, obviously. Most of us probably connect with the psalm that way first, right?
Totally, yeah. We're the sheep needing help, needing guidance.
Yeah.
Especially these days, right? It's easy to feel totally lost, like overwhelmed with all the choices and stuff, like you're not enough, not doing enough, constantly bombarded with that message.
Definitely, definitely. And that's where the whole shepherd thing, the metaphor, it really hits home. When you feel that lost, that vulnerable, the psalm is like, hey, you've got the shepherd. He knows you inside and out, sees you for who you really are, not all the stuff you think you're missing.
Yeah. And that's where that line comes in, right? The one everyone knows, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like you're just giving yourself over to that, to trusting, to depending.
Exactly. And the Hebrew, the original language, is interesting there. That word for want, it can also mean lack. So it's deeper than just needing stuff, physical things. It's like, in God, you're complete, nothing missing.
I like that because, man, we're told we need so much more all the time, right? More things, more success, more people to like us.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
It really is. Psalm 23 is like the opposite of that whole consumerism thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's saying you're content, you're fulfilled, not because you've got a ton of stuff, but because God, your shepherd, he gives you what you actually need.
And the imagery they use, it's beautiful. It's not just basic survival like, oh, I've got food and water, that's it. It's green pastures, still waters. There's this sense of like abundance, peace, even luxury almost.
You got it. Like the shepherd is offering this life of peace, contentment, a place you can rest, be restored. And that leads to another big theme in the psalm, the whole restoration idea.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. Restoration of the soul, it says, and being led in paths of righteousness. That feels like bigger than just following rules.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's about being made whole, being back in sync with what God wants, which in the end is about love, about living a life with purpose, with meaning.
And who doesn't want that, right? To feel like you're on the right track, like you've got a purpose. But sometimes it's like we're just stumbling around, making wrong turns, totally lost.
And that's where the shepherd comes in. He knows the way, even when we don't. He guides us, not by yelling orders, but little nudges, whispers of wisdom, and sometimes discipline too.
Oh, yeah, speaking of discipline, one of the sources talked about the shepherd's rod and staff, like the tools they use to correct the sheep, right? Made me think, sometimes we need that tough love to get back on track, even if it's not fun at the time.
Exactly right. Sometimes we go off course, make mistakes, we need that correction. But it's not about the shepherd being mean or punishing us, it's about getting us back to safety, back to those green pastures, still waters, where we can really thrive.
Like a parent setting boundaries.
No.
Right? It's not to make the kid miserable, it's to keep them safe, help them grow.
Exactly. It's about love, not being controlling.
Yeah.
And trusting that the shepherd knows what's good for us, even when we're like, why is this happening?
Which brings us to this image, I think is one of the most powerful in the whole psalm, but people don't always talk about it. The feast. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. What do you think about that? It's not just like a casual lunch, right?
No way, right? It's a banquet, this huge celebration, abundance, victory, the whole thing, and it's happening right there while your enemies are watching. This is where understanding the culture back then is important.
Yeah, one of the sources said that back then, offering hospitality to someone, especially in front of their enemies, it was huge deal. Like you were saying, this person is mine, I'll protect them. You mess with them, you mess with me.
Exactly. So God's the ultimate host here. He's not just protecting you, he's giving you this extravagant spread, even while there's opposition all around. Like, boom, enemies might be lurking, but I'm feasting with the king.
Wow, yeah. That's a whole different way to look at it. It's not just about being safe. It's about being celebrated, honored, given this place of importance.
And that speaks to us, doesn't it? As humans, we want to belong, we want security, to know we have a place at the table even when the world feels crazy and dangerous.
I love that. So we got this shepherd guiding us, protecting us, giving us everything we need, and then throws this feast for us, even with danger all around. But the psalm It doesn't just stay with that sheep metaphor, right? Like the sources pointed out, it changes.
You're right, it shifts. It's not just shepherd-sheep anymore. It becomes more like host-guest, more personal.
And that shift, it really stuck with me. The relationship gets deeper, right? More personal. Less about being one of the many sheep, more like you're invited in closer.
Yes, that's a big point. The psalm is inviting us to go beyond just being taken care of, protected, and to experience a deeper connection with God. It's like moving from the pasture to the banquet hall, you know what I mean?
But how do we do that? What does it look like to go from being just a sheep to this honored guest?
That's where the whole thing about hearing the shepherd's voice and following comes in. One source put it this way. If you want all the good stuff, the care from God, the good shepherd, got to be one of his sheep.
So it's about belonging to the flock, but also about, like, recognizing his voice, choosing to follow.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just sitting back and receiving blessings. It's actively being in that relationship, which that takes practice. It takes learning to hear his voice when there's so much other noise going on around us.
So how do we do that? How do we learn to actually hear it?
Great question.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll get into in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah, it really is a journey, isn't it? Like tuning into a specific radio station, the more we kind of immerse ourselves in the things that connect us with God, the clearer his voice becomes, I think.
Ooh, I like that analogy. So thinking about it like that, what are some things we can do to tune into that frequency?
Well, one of the sources talked about being in nature, which I think is, so important. We don't do it enough. There's just something about being surrounded by all of that, creation that really quiets everything else down and opens us up to that sense of awe and wonder. Definitely. Definitely. It's like nature itself is speaking to us if we just stop and listen. But for those of us who are, stuck in the city or don't have easy access to nature, what are some other ways to cultivate that stillness?
Well, both sources talked a lot about prayer and meditation, not just like saying the same words over and over, but creating space for quiet, for reflection, for actually listening for that still, small voice inside.
Easier said than done.
Right.
I mean, our minds are going a mile a minute most of the time, to-do lists, worries, all that. Any tips for how to actually quiet all that down?
What helped me was focusing on my breath. When my mind starts to wander, I gently bring it back to the rhythm of breathing in, breathing out. It's a simple thing, but it really helps to ground you in the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting. Both sources connect this listening to God's voice with obedience. But it doesn't feel like blind obedience. You know what I mean?
No, definitely not. It's more about aligning our will with his will. Trusting that he knows the way, even when we can't see the whole picture. It's like, trusting a mountain guide. You might not know every step of the trail, but you trust that they'll get you to the top safely.
And that trust comes from knowing them, from having that relationship. It's not just following orders blindly. It's like walking alongside someone you trust, someone who wants the best for you.
Exactly, exactly. And the more we, cultivate that relationship with God, the more easily we'll recognize his voice, even when it's subtle or unexpected.
Speaking of unexpected, one thing that surprised me, the sources talked about the shepherd's guidance and discipline. That's not always the most fun topic, is it?
No, not really, but it's an important part of the journey. Just like the shepherd uses the rod and staff to guide the sheep back to the path, sometimes God uses discipline to, correct our course when we stray.
And that can look different for different people, right? Sometimes it's a gentle nudge. Sometimes it's something more painful, something that really wakes us up.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember, discipline isn't about punishment. It's about love. It's about helping us grow, mature, become more like, the people God created us to be.
Like pruning a plant, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to cut back some branches to help it grow stronger, healthier in the long run.
Perfect analogy. And just like a gardener prunes a plant with care, with intention, God disciplines us with love, with purpose.
But it's hard to see it that way sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're the one going through it. Easy to feel like, man, am I being punished? Has God abandoned me?
Yeah, I get that. And in those times, it's good to remember the shepherd's still there, even when we're in that valley of the shadow of death, He hasn't left us. He's right there with us in the dark, offering comfort, strength.
Which brings us back to that image of the feast, right? It's not just about having plenty, it's about victory. Even when there's stuff going on around you, it's like a victory party right in front of your enemies.
Ah, yeah. And that's so important. Even when things are tough, when we're struggling, we can still celebrate God's faithfulness, his goodness. We can still find that joy, that peace in him, even in the middle of the storm.
So the feast, It's not just some future thing. It's something we can experience now, even when things are rough.
Right. It's about perspective. We can focus on the problems and feel overwhelmed, or we can focus on God and find that strength and peace in his love.
Yeah, like choosing to see the glass half full instead of half empty.
Yeah.
That's a powerful message, especially these days when everything feels so negative, so discouraging.
It really is. And it reminds us, even though we might be like those sheep wandering around, getting lost sometimes, we have this shepherd. He's always watching over us, guiding us, protecting us, leading us to a place of abundance and joy.
But even with a shepherd, there's still that choice, right? We got to choose to follow, to listen, to trust. We're not robots, just blindly obeying.
That's huge EE. And that goes back to what we were talking about, the heart of this psalm, that deep personal relationship with God. Because in that relationship, that intimacy, that trust, that's where we find real freedom, real fulfillment.
So it's not just about rules or actions. It's about that connection with God that changes our hearts, our minds, how we see ourselves, how we see the world.
Absolutely. And that change, that shift, it's what allows us to really experience God's love and grace, not just in the future, but right now, in every single moment.
Like putting on a new pair of glasses.
Right.
And suddenly you see the world in a whole new way. All the beauty, the goodness, the grace that's already there.
Yes. And that light, it shines even brighter when we come together, as a community, as fellow sheep, walking this journey together, supporting each other, celebrating God's faithfulness.
Which brings us to another powerful part of Psalm 23, that sense of belonging, that community of faith that's there for us, supporting us.
For sure. It's knowing you're not alone in this. We have the shepherd to guide us. Indeed, we have each other to walk alongside, to encourage, to challenge, to celebrate with.
Because even though the song is about that individual relationship with God, it also shows us we're part of something bigger, connected to this community of faith that goes way back all over the world.
And that feeling, belonging to something bigger than ourselves, that's powerful. Gives you a sense of purpose, who you are, knowing you have a place, a role to play in God's story.
And that story, just like Psalm 23, it's full of twists and turns, highs and lows, tough times and victories. But through it all, we have that assurance the shepherd is there, guiding us, protecting us, providing for us, and ultimately leading us home.
And that takes us to that last verse where David says, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." That's powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Like saying the journey might be long, might have some rough patches, but we can trust that God's love, his faithfulness, will always be there.
And that's a good thing to hold on to, especially as we get into the last part of our exploration.
Yeah, that last verse, that whole dwelling in the house of the Lord forever thing, always makes me think about heaven, like that final destination. But the sources, they connected it to our lives now, too, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, yeah. It's not just about some, reward way down the line. It's about experiencing that closeness with God, that security, that abundance right here, right now, in our everyday lives.
So it's like heaven isn't just a place. It's, a way of being, something we can cultivate here through our relationship with God.
Exactly. And I think Psalm 23, it's like a guidebook for that. How to have that heavenly mindset, even when life is messy, and hard.
Because, come on, life's not always green pastures and still waters, right? There's going to be valleys, storms, times when we feel totally lost and scared, alone.
For sure. But that's what the psalm reminds us of. Even in those times, the shepherd's there. He doesn't just leave us to deal with it ourselves. He's right there in the valley with us, comforting us, giving us strength, showing us the way.
And it's funny, isn't it? Sometimes those tough times, when we feel our weakest, that's when we feel God's presence the strongest.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like when we weak, that's when his strength really shines through. And it's when we surrender, stop trying to control everything ourselves and trust in him. That's where the peace comes from, the freedom.
Like we finally just let ourselves be the sheep, lean on the shepherd, trust that he knows what he's doing, even if W don't get it.
And that's the beauty of Psalm 23, I think. It's not just pretty words. It's a whole experience, that journey of faith from feeling weak to feeling strong, from scared to peaceful, from alone to belonging.
And we don't have to do it alone either. The sources, they really emphasize community, how important it is to have other sheep, walking alongside us, cheering us on, supporting us, pushing us to grow.
Yes, because faith, it's not meant to be a solo thing, right? We need each other. We need people who get it, who get what we're going through, who celebrate the good stuff with us and help us get back on track when we, wander off.
So, we're all in this giant flock.
There you go.
Each of us on our own path, but all heading to the same place in the end, that house of the Lord, where we'll be with him forever.
Man, that's a beautiful thought, isn't it? That no matter what's happening right now, no matter how lost or alone we might feel, we're part of something so much bigger, something that means something, something that goes beyond all the ups and downs of life.
It really is. And I think that's the main thing to take away from Psalm 23. We're not just these sheep running around lost and confused. We're God's children, loved by him, guided and protected by this shepherd who leads us to a place of, like, fullness and peace and joy that never ends.
Yeah, and that's a truth that can help us through anything, right? Any tough time, any valley, any storm. Because no matter what, we know the shepherd's there, comforting us, loving us, guiding us, leading us home.
Well, that's a pretty amazing way to wrap up our deep dive into Psalm 23. I don't know about you, but I feel like I understand it in a whole new way now.
Me too, for sure. It's amazing, something you think you know, and then bam, there's all this depth, this beauty you never saw before.
And I hope our listeners feel that too, that they've discovered something new, that they feel closer to God, to his love, his grace through this amazing psalm.
I hope so too. And that it makes them want to keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep digging deep into all the mysteries and wonders of life.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep searching, keep wondering, and keep diving deep.